According to satellite images, 6 modernized aircraft have been confirmed. And although the Kremlin constantly rolls out its aircraft onto airfields for satellite cameras, only 7 out of 18 modernized planes are used to strike Ukraine. Victoria Yarishko looked into what exactly Russian modernization entails. It really is an upgrade, or, an attempt to assemble one updated aircraft out of 3 old ones. After all, due to sanctions, Moscow does not receive parts for repairing or building new aircraft. And over 4 years of war, Ukraine's defense forces have significantly thinned out, so to speak, the aggressor's combat aircraft fleet. We'll see.
The Tu-160 is the largest and most powerful strategic bomber in Russian aviation. It is from these aircraft that the aggressor launches Kh-101 and Kh-555 cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities and energy infrastructure. Satellite images have shown that Moscow is trying to upgrade its aircraft, installing more modern components.
This is the so-called glass cockpit, which replaces outdated or unavailable avionics, meaning a switch to digital systems. And of course, it also involves installing additional electronic warfare and navigation equipment, which, while not revolutionary, does allow for an evolutionary improvement of the existing aircraft's capabilities.
But updating the aircraft fleet under sanctions is not easy for Moscow. The lack of high-quality imported components and equipment slows down the Federation's ability to upgrade its technology.
In recent years, only about 7 aircraft have been modernized. And it took Russia approximately 5 years to do this. So we need to understand that sanctions really do have a direct impact on Russia's ability to modernize and repair its aircraft.
Overall, Russia has about 18 Tu-160 bombers. Of these, only 7 are used by the Russians for strikes against Ukraine because maintaining such aircraft is very expensive.
The Tu-160 uses a very specific type of fuel. There is only a single brand of fuel, which is produced exclusively and specifically for the Tu-160, and it was both manufactured and stored at oil depots near Engels. Throughout the years of 2024 and 2025, multiple precision strikes on those strategic oil transfer stations and large-scale fuel storage depots were officially confirmed to have occurred. This significantly limited the potential of the Tu-160.
The combat capabilities of Russian aviation have also been seriously reduced by Ukraine's long-range drones. No.
It is equally important to consider that the Ukrainians have dealt significant blows to their aviation. We carried out Operation Classic Web, but aside from the Classic Web operation, let's not forget that more than 700 units of the enemy's combat-ready equipment have been destroyed. This includes helicopters, army aviation, attack aircraft, and the enemy's strategic aviation.
Due to the limited number of aircraft, Russia is already forced to preserve its strategic aviation.
We see that the planes Russia uses are regularly underloaded, meaning that the missile load is at most 50 to 60%, that is, only about 2/3. And this is done to reduce wear and tear and the load on the aircraft itself, since their number remains limited.
So, according to experts, there is currently no talk of increasing the combat capability of Russia's aviation. It's more about maintaining what is still able to fly.
When we talk about their modernization, we're really talking, I would say, about money laundering and maintaining what already exists in proper condition, but not about increasing their capabilities.
Russia's strategic aviation still remains a threat to us, but the war has already changed the rules. Ukraine is taking down enemy aircraft and turning the most expensive aggressor bombers from an instrument of power into a limited resource.
Volodymyr Zelensky wants to restore the European trio format in order to use it in peace negotiations with Russia. The president of Ukraine has already raised this issue with the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. The Telegraph writes that negotiations are ongoing, but no concrete plans for direct talks with the Russian Federation have been reached. Let us recall the Eurotroika format is an informal mechanism of diplomatic cooperation between France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. We have the opportunity to discuss this. Joining us is Petro Olishchuk, political scientist and lecturer at Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev. Mr. Peter, thank you for finding time for us.
Thank you. European.
3. What is your vision of the prospects of such an informal association in times, I would add a degree, when formal associations are also far from all effective?
No, well, I think so. I can't help but agree with you here that formal associations are ineffective. Right now, everyone is guessing. There are these constant sessions of fortune telling about NATO these days. Will it happen or not? Will it respond or not respond? How will they react to corresponding provocations from Russia? But in any case, the crisis that NATO is currently experiencing didn't start yesterday. And it's obvious that it's not just about the opinion of one Trump as the main initiator, so to speak, of the current crisis in the Atlantic Alliance. It's all much more complicated, and discussions from the United States about why we should defend Europe have been heard before. Now it's just that all of this has become more acute. And in such a situation, I think that in the near future, we will see a global restructuring of alliances in the world, because if you can't rely on old alliances and the risk of certain retaliatory aggressions and constant military threats isn't going anywhere, then obviously everyone will be looking for new ways to protect themselves. Therefore, I think that it doesn't necessarily have to be in the format you mentioned, like that trio, but I personally have no doubt that there will be new security alliances, including in Europe.
Mr. Petro, I can't help but recall the words of the Finnish leader who said quite recently that, supposedly, Europe is more united than ever. And here we have three major European players: the United Kingdom, France, Germany. Tell me, please, so that it doesn't turn out like the fable of the swan, the pike and the crab, with each pulling in their own direction. When we look at the current landscape, are there any fundamental and insurmountable differences or deep-seated conflicts between these three specific and influential European players? Or are they truly capable of successfully forming such a powerful and unified strategic monolith together in the long run?
From my perspective, I really don't see any individuals here having truly insurmountable problems or deep-seated contradictions. Another thing is that even tactical disagreements can create quite serious problems when it comes to resolving certain issues. So probably no one in Europe has insurmountable contradictions. Insurmountable contradictions probably exist only between Europe and Russia, since Russia is an aggressive imperial state that intends to change borders by force. Everything else can be resolved through negotiations, compromises, and other appropriate decisions. Here, as I see it, the problem lies elsewhere. The problem is that European politicians have become accustomed to not making difficult decisions for decades. That is, they are constantly inclined to postpone certain decisions for later, because now there are elections, now, for example, there are other electoral processes, or now a government needs to be formed, and then there are some other relevant problems. And as a result, difficult decisions are not made, they are postponed for decades. And this, in fact, has created the rather unfortunate situation with European security that we are now witnessing, because the necessary decisions simply were not made in time. For example, in Europe, there were at least 4 years after Russia began its aggression against Ukraine when it became clear to everyone what Russia really is. I think definitively, well, at least to everyone except those who are openly working for Russia. But in my opinion, that time was not properly used to actually prepare for any challenges, including, for example, the possibility of Russian aggression without the active involvement of the United States in the war. In short, there were different scenarios. That is, I think the bigger problem is not some insurmountable contradictions, but rather the lack of political will. And this lack has been developing for a long time.
And, we suggest continuing this thought. Ukraine needs to choose its targets for strikes on Russia more carefully in order not to create risks for NATO countries. This was stated by Poland's Minister of Defense Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz. According to him, such incidents could be used by the Russian Federation for provocation, propaganda, and intensifying hybrid warfare. This statement was made after an incident in Estonia where a drone was shot down the day before. The Ukrainian side apologized for the incident, and in Tallinn, officials called on Kyiv to strengthen control over drones after several violations of Baltic countries' airspace. It is worth noting that Finnish media, citing sources in NATO, reported that the Russian army is attempting to direct drones toward power grid facilities, transport systems, and military bases in the Baltic countries. Mr. Petro, I must say that unfortunately, we have a very serious incident on our hands. Unfortunately, the occurrence of such an incident, from my own personal perspective, and I emphasize, in my opinion, was simply an inevitable matter, if you will excuse the tautology of time. What is your perspective on how to handle such situations, since one way or another we need to strike Russian Federation territory so that the Russian Federation does not strike ours?
Well, once again, I would really like to pose this specific question in the following way. For what possible reason is the nation of Ukraine sending these unmanned aerial drones directly there, all the way to the strategic Leningrad region located deep within Russian territory? Because these drones, for example, that enter the airspace of Latvia or Estonia, by the way, Ukraine does not intentionally send them there. That's the result of Russian electronic warfare, but Ukraine sends them in that direction because it's the main hub of Russian oil exports. That is, Russia mainly exports oil through the ports of the Baltic Sea. Everything depends on this. And in fact, Ukraine has recently been demonstrating an increasingly higher level of effectiveness with these strikes. For example, recently everyone witnessed a rather successful attack carried out jointly by the Unmanned Systems Forces and the Security Service of Ukraine (SBU) on Moscow. They broke through Moscow's deeply layered echelon defense. But this was mainly a demonstration. In the case of the Baltic Sea ports, which are also regularly reached by drones from the SBU and other relevant agencies, it's a matter of the Russians' ability to make money. And let's be honest, not long ago, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and not just him in fact, but various official government agencies across Ukraine, stated that, for example, when the Russians recently carried out another devastating and brutal terrorist attack on Kyiv, the very missile that essentially destroyed an entire apartment entrance, causing many tragic casualties in the city of Kyiv, was found to be largely composed of a variety of different European and American electronic components. And the Russians buy them with the money they receive from oil exports. Accordingly, our current situation has arisen as a result of two factors. The first factor, the Europeans were unable to properly influence Russian oil exports. They couldn't and they didn't want to. In other words, they are essentially ignoring the fact that the Russians continue to use the Baltic Sea to export oil with a shadow fleet despite all the sanctions. That's the first factor. And the second factor, de facto, they have not been able to block the supply of components for Russian missiles, and Russia uses them to manufacture missiles and then shell Ukrainian cities, killing Ukrainian citizens. Sorry, but Ukraine has no other options than to strike at those very Baltic coastal regions because there simply aren't any other alternatives left for Ukraine. Otherwise, how else can we influence the Russians to at least reduce, if not stop, the intensity of shelling Ukrainian cities? This is a matter of casualties among Ukrainian citizens. If our Western partners don't understand this, it's very unfortunate because they can't see the root of the issue and they can't see why, in fact, Russia is now able to threaten them. And why is that? Because it still has the money to do so. And why does it still have money? Because you did nothing, even though you had every opportunity to block the Baltic export of Russian oil, you did nothing about it. For a whole range of reasons, I understand. But de facto, Ukraine is helping you now. It's Ukraine that's solving your problems for you.
So what should be done then? Should we explain basic cause and effect relationships to our partners?
Look, we won't be able to stop all these attacks as long as the fighting continues. That means they have a few options. Option 1. They should accept this proposal and shoot down those same drones that enter their airspace. Option number 2. Block Russian oil exports more actively. Ukraine might not send any drones at all if the Baltic Sea is blocked for Russian oil. And then there's option number 3. To put pressure on Russia and Putin in some other way so that they agree to a ceasefire. And a ceasefire would also mean an end to these attacks.